The first card my son ever made me was a piece of folded construction paper with a crayon drawing of a man holding a hammer. He was 6 years old. He wrote Best Dad on the front and spelled it B-Set Dad. And I kept it in my wallet for 11 years until it fell apart. The last thing he said to me before I changed everything was, "Dad, you're being dramatic. It's just a house." Somewhere between that crayon drawing and that sentence, I stopped being his father and started being a problem he needed to manage. Welcome. If you're watching this and you've got someone in your life who's mistaken your loyalty for leverage, drop the city you're calling in from down in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story sounds familiar, hit subscribe, because you're going to want to hear what came next. My wife's name was Lorraine. We were married for 31 years, and I want you to understand something about her before I tell you anything else, because none of what I'm about to say makes sense without it. Lorraine was the kind of woman who remembered the names of people's dogs. Not just the names she remembered when they got sick, when they passed, when the family got a new one. She kept a little address book, spiral-bound, blue cover, that she updated by hand because she didn't trust her memory with the things that mattered to her. She had the name and birthday of every person on our street, every person in her book club, every person she'd ever worked alongside in 30 years of teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary. When she retired, her students, not colleagues, her actual former students, now grown, some of them with children of their own, drove from 3 states to be at her retirement party. She had no idea they were coming. She cried for 40 minutes and apologized for every one of them. That was Lorraine. We had one son, Marcus. He was born in the fall of 1989, and from the day he came home from the hospital, Lorraine said, "Hank, this boy is going to do big things." She wasn't wrong about that. Exactly. Marcus did do big things. He became a structural engineer, married a woman named Priscilla whose family came from money in a way that you feel before anyone tells you, and moved 40 minutes north to a town called Cedarwood Hills, where the houses had names instead of addresses. We were proud of him. I want to be honest about that. We were genuinely proud. What I was slower to notice was the way pride can be a comfortable place to stop paying attention. My name is Hank Calloway. People have called me Hank my whole life. I'm 63 years old. I spent 38 years running a plumbing supply company out of a warehouse on Route 9, outside of Delwood, Pennsylvania. My father built it, I grew it, and when I sold it 6 years ago, I put every dollar of the proceeds into a money market account and kept showing up at the warehouse out of habit for 3 months before I admitted to myself I didn't actually have anywhere to be anymore. The house I need to tell you about the house before I tell you what happened to it. Lorraine and I bought it in 1991, 4,200 square feet on a double lot on West Haven Road, backing up to a creek that froze in January and ran clear and loud in April. We weren't supposed to be able to afford it. The inspection came back with 14 items. The roof was soft in 2 places. The sump pump was original to the house, and there was a crack in the foundation that the previous owner had painted over twice, hoping nobody would notice. I noticed. I also noticed the kitchen had a window above the sink that looked out over a stand of white pines, and Lorraine stood in front of that window for 4 minutes without saying a word, and I knew we were buying the house. I fixed everything myself, over 2 years, on weekends. The roof, the pump, the foundation. I poured concrete at 6 in the morning before Marcus was awake, and regraded the drainage myself with a rented machine. I barely knew how to operate. By the time I was done, I probably had $30,000 of labor in that house that no one would ever see on an appraisal, but that I knew was there every time I walked through the door. Lorraine used to say that house was my second love letter to her after The Ring. She was diagnosed in the summer of 2022. Lung cancer, though she never smoked a day in her life. Stage 3 at diagnosis. We did everything we were supposed to do. Every appointment, every second opinion, every clinical trial that would take us. And she fought it the way she did everything methodically, without complaint, with that little blue address book on the nightstand, so she could keep writing down birthdays even from a hospital bed. She passed in March of 2024, 14 months after diagnosis. I was holding her hand. In her final weeks, we talked about the house. She told me she wanted me to stay in it as long as I wanted to. She said, "Hank, don't let anyone rush you out of that house before you're ready." She said it twice, the kind of twice that means she'd been thinking about it. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. She said she knew that. Then she said, "Make sure Marcus knows it too." I should have put that in writing. That's the part I'll carry with me. Lorraine left the house to me outright, the way we'd always intended. The will was clear. What wasn't clear, what I never thought needed to be clear, was how long I planned to stay, or what I planned to do with it eventually. In my mind, and I think in Lorraine's mind, there was a general, unspoken understanding that when I was ready to move on, the house would go to Marcus. That was never a conversation. It was never a document. It was the kind of thing families assume because they've never had a reason not to. I want to tell you about a man named Roy Garrett before I go further, because what he did matters to how this story ends. Roy worked for me at the supply company for 22 years. He started loading trucks when he was 19 and ended up running the warehouse floor, which meant he was effectively running the company because I was better at selling than I ever was at logistics. When I sold the company, the buyer kept most of the staff, but Roy got squeezed out in the consolidation 8 months later. He was 56 with no college degree, 2 kids still at home, and a bad knee from a loading dock accident we'd settled quietly years before. I felt the weight of that. When he called to tell me, I didn't offer sympathy. I called my accountant that afternoon and asked what it would take to set him up. Roy Garrett wasn't looking for a handout, so I didn't frame it that way. I told him I needed a warehouse consultant for a project I was vaguely developing, paid him a retainer for 14 months while he got his certifications, and never once called in a single consultation because there was no project. He knew. He never said he knew. We kept it professional, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Roy still calls me on my birthday. He called the week after Lorraine's funeral without any prompting, just to say he was sorry and that she was a good woman, and that some people leave a mark on a room that you only notice after they're gone. Marcus didn't call that week. He sent flowers and a card signed by both of them. For the first year after Lorraine died, Marcus and I were careful with each other in the way people are when grief is still raw, and neither one of you is sure what the other one needs. He called on Sundays. We talked about his work, about his kids. He has 2, James, who is 8, and Cecilia, who is 6, and we didn't talk about much else. I understood that. I was doing the same thing myself, keeping the surface calm while everything underneath sorted itself out. What I didn't realize was that Priscilla had started making calculations. It started small. A comment here and there about the house being a lot of space for one person. A question about whether I'd thought about simplifying. At Thanksgiving, I overheard her telling her mother that the West Haven Road property was sitting on some real value. She said it the way you talk about a stock, not a home. I told myself I'd misheard. That's a thing I did a lot in those years. Told myself I'd misheard. In February, Marcus called on a Tuesday instead of a Sunday, which should have told me something right there. "Dad, Priscilla and I have been talking." He paused in a way that meant the next sentence had been rehearsed. "We think it might be time to think about your living situation." I asked him what he meant by that. "The house is a lot. The maintenance alone, you're 63, Dad, and that's a big property. We've looked at some numbers. And honestly, if you sold now, you'd be in a very good position. You could get a nice place, something manageable, and it would free up some capital that's currently just sitting." I sat very still on the other end of that phone. "Capital," I said. "That's not the only word for it." "That's the word you used, Marcus." He moved on quickly, the way people do when they've said the real thing and want to get past it. He mentioned a realtor that Priscilla's cousin worked with. He mentioned that spring was an ideal time to list. He mentioned, almost as a footnote, that he and Priscilla had been looking at adding an addition to their house in Cedarwood Hills, and that between the two things, the timing worked out well. I want you to notice what he did not say. He did not say, "Dad, are you okay in that house?" He did not say, "Is there anything you need?" He did not say anything about his mother, who had stood at that kitchen window for 4 minutes in 1991, or about the foundation I poured concrete into at 6 in the morning, or about the 31 years of life that had happened inside those walls. He said the timing worked out well. I told him I wasn't ready to sell. He said he understood. The call ended pleasantly, the way all our calls ended in that period. Careful, managed. I thought that was the end of it. In April, I came home from the hardware store on a Thursday evening and found a real estate brochure on my kitchen counter. Full color, professional photos. It took me a moment to realize the photos were of my house, my kitchen, that window above the sink. Someone had been inside and photographed my home. I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, which meant he was expecting my call. "Priscilla's cousin just wanted to show you what a listing could look like." "It's not a commitment, Dad. It's just—" "Marcus." I said his name the way I hadn't since he was a teenager. Just the one word. "Did you give someone access to this house without asking me?" A pause. Then, "Priscilla has a key from when we were checking in on the place after Mom passed. It wasn't a big deal. It was a big deal to me." "Dad, you're being dramatic. It's just a house." I put the phone down on the counter. I didn't hang up. I just set it down, face up, and walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the white pines. And I stood there the way Lorraine had stood there 33 years ago. Except I wasn't deciding to buy. I was deciding something else entirely. I picked the phone back up. Marcus was still there. "I'll call you Sunday," I said. Then I hung up. "I want you to understand what happened next, because it's important that you see it the right way. I wasn't acting out of anger, though I felt anger. I wasn't acting out of spite, though there was some of that too, if I'm honest. What I was acting out of was something I hadn't felt in a long time, which was clarity. The kind that comes when someone finally shows you exactly who they are, and you realize you've been politely disagreeing with the evidence for years. I called my attorney, a woman named Carol Dempsey, who had handled Lorraine's estate, and who had that particular quality of good attorneys where she said very little and meant all of it. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Hank, what do you want to do?" I told her. The house went on the market 3 weeks later. Not because Priscilla's cousin listed it, because I listed it, with a different agency, at a price that reflected what 38 years of my labor and attention had actually built. I had 2 offers in the first week. I accepted the cleaner one, a family from Pittsburgh, the Aldersons, who had 3 children under 10 and who, when they came for the walkthrough, had a little girl who stood in front of the kitchen window for a long moment, looking out at the pine trees. I shook her father's hand and told him it was a good house. I meant it the way I meant it when I bought it. I did not tell Marcus the house was for sale. I want to tell you about what I did with the proceeds, because this is the part that matters most to me. Roy Garrett's youngest, a boy named Danny, was 17 and wanted to go to trade school for electrical work. Roy had mentioned it in passing the last time we talked, the way he mentioned most things involving money, which was briefly and without making it a request. I called Carol Dempsey back and told her I wanted to establish an educational trust in Lorraine's name through Millbrook Elementary, her school, the one she'd spent 30 years in with the first designated recipient being Danny Garrett, to cover trade school certification, tools, and a first-year apprenticeship stipend. The trust would continue after that, 1 recipient each year, selected by the school's guidance counselor based on a set of criteria that Lorraine herself would have recognized: work ethic, need, and a specific kind of quiet dignity that doesn't ask for help even when it should. And for James and Cecilia Marcus's children, my grandchildren, who are 8 and 6 and have nothing to do with any of this, I set up a separate trust. Education. Not wedding, not milestone, education. The kind of trust that opens when each of them turns 18 with enough in it to cover 4 years at any state university or 2 years at a trade school, their choice. With one condition underneath it, written in Carol Dempsey's plainest language: if either parent or legal guardian attempted to redirect, access, borrow against, or in any way influence the distribution of those funds before the child reached majority, the full amount for that child would transfer immediately and irrevocably to Millbrook Elementary's General Scholarship Fund. Not a second chance, not a conversation, just gone. I didn't do that because I wanted to punish Marcus. I did it because I am a grandfather before I am a disappointed father, and I know the difference between those two things, even when it hurts to hold them both at once. The Aldersons moved in on a Wednesday in May. I was in Pittsburgh by then, in a 2-bedroom apartment near the river that I'm renting while I figure out what comes next. It's smaller than any room in the house on West Haven Road. It has a window above the kitchen sink that looks out at a parking garage. It's fine. I'm fine. Fine is underrated. Marcus called the Sunday after the closing, which was how I knew he'd found out. He called 11 minutes after noon. I know the time because I was watching the clock, the way you do when you know a call is coming and you're not sure you're ready for it, but you answer anyway because you've been not answering long enough. Dad! His voice was different. Not angry. Not yet. More like a man who has just walked into a room and found the furniture rearranged and can't quite orient himself. Marcus. The house sold. It did. You sold Mom's house. I let that sit for a moment because I think he needed to hear himself say it. I sold my house, I said. Your mother left it to me. A long pause. Then, quieter. We didn't know it was even listed. I know. How could you do that without telling us? I thought about how to answer that, because I wanted to answer it correctly and not in a way that won an argument, but in a way that was actually true. I said, Marcus, you put a brochure on my kitchen counter with photographs of my home that someone had taken without asking me. You told me it was just a house, so I treated it like just a house. I sold it. He didn't say anything for a moment. The money went where your mother would have wanted it to go, I said. Once I took the time to remember what that meant, I told him about the trust at Millbrook Elementary. I told him about Danny Garrett. I heard him breathing on the line the way people breathe when they're trying to stay composed, and it's costing them something. Then I told him about James and Cecilia. I didn't cut your children out, I said. I made sure they were taken care of in a way that you and Priscilla can't touch. If either of you tries to get near that money before those kids turn 18, every dollar goes to the school. So don't. That's not fair. Probably not, I said. But fair isn't really what we're talking about anymore, is it? You told me it was just a house. So I handled it like just a house and moved on. That's what you asked me to do. Another silence. Longer this time. What about us? He said finally. And I want to be careful how I characterize his voice when he said it, because it was the first moment in a long time where he sounded like he was actually asking instead of managing. Like something had cracked open just slightly. What about us is up to you, I said. I'm not disappearing. I'm not telling you we're done. I'm telling you I'm done being an asset you're waiting to liquidate. You want a father? Call me on Sundays. Talk to me like I'm a person. Bring James and Cecilia up to see me sometime in this apartment that doesn't have a yard or a creek, and let me take them to get ice cream and not talk about real estate. He didn't answer that. I'm still your dad, I said. I'm just not the house anymore. The call ended without him saying much else. He said he needed to think. I told him to take whatever time he needed. I meant it. I'm 63 years old, and I have gotten very patient in the last 14 months. Not with cruelty, not with games, but with the simple fact that people need time to absorb things they weren't expecting. Marcus calls on Sundays now. They're different calls than they used to be. Less careful, more real. Priscilla doesn't come up much. James told me 2 weeks ago that he wants to be an engineer like his dad, and also maybe a chef, and that he's been practicing making omelets. I told him I'd come up and be his first customer. He took that very seriously. He's 8 years old and he's already got more integrity than most people I've met in 6 decades. Cecilia drew me a picture of a house with a big window and trees behind it. She mailed it to my apartment address, which she had written in her own handwriting on the envelope. I have it on my refrigerator. It's the first thing I see in the morning. Danny Garrett started his electrical certification program in September. Roy called me the day Danny's acceptance letter came in, and I could hear something in Roy's voice that I hadn't heard before, which was relief so complete it had gone quiet. He said, "Hank, I don't know what to say." I told him to say nothing and let his kid go become something. He laughed. It was a good laugh. I still don't know exactly what comes next for me. The apartment is temporary. I've been looking at a smaller place. 2 bedrooms, nothing dramatic, maybe a townhouse somewhere with a little outdoor space. Something I can manage, and that manages me back. Something that's mine in all the ways that matter. Not because anyone else is waiting for me to stop living in it, but because I chose it. Lorraine used to say that the bravest thing a person can do is stop waiting to be told when they're allowed to begin. She said that about herself, about waiting until her 40s to start painting, which she did badly and joyfully for the rest of her life. I think about that a lot now. I'm not here to tell you my son is a bad person. He made calculations when he should have been asking questions. He let someone else's priorities crowd out his own instincts. He forgot, for a while, that the man who poured concrete at 6 in the morning and kept a crayon drawing in his wallet for 11 years was still the same man standing in front of him asking to be treated like one. That's a recoverable mistake. I hope he recovers it. I think he's trying. What I'm here to tell you is this. If someone in your life has looked at what you've built, your home, your savings, your decades of quiet showing up, and started talking about it like it's capital waiting to be freed up, you are allowed to free it yourself, on your own terms, toward the things and people that deserve it. You don't need their timeline. You don't need their realtor. You need a good attorney, a clear head, and the willingness to finally let the evidence mean what it means. I kept my promise to Lorraine. I stayed in that house until I was ready to leave, and when I left, I took everything that mattered with me. If this story hit something for you, like it and let me know down below. Tell me what's the one thing someone said to you that finally made everything clear. I want to read your answers. And subscribe if you want to hear what happens when people realize too late that they were never owed what they were waiting for. I'll see you in the next one.